Well, obviously on the day before training camp begins, there's a crescendo of enthusiasm, as you head into camp. And it's been a good summer for us. I think we've had a lot of contact with our players, touched our players a lot. People have worked. We've worked collectively, and excited to get going. I think this is a group that, last year having an opportunity to kind of feel and experience this team. A few things happened in this summer that that you think about, respond to, try to continue to develop basically plans and a path for a team to get better throughout a year, and mixing together that urgency and desire to be good, from day one on, and with kind of the realism involved in the fact that growth usually isn't linear, and understanding that we're going to have some challenges along the way and to embrace them. So all those things kind of woven together right now.
Can you speak of the challenges that are going to come your guys' way? The East, of course, has gotten a little bit harder with Dave coming to the Bucks.
Yeah.
How do you guys approach some of those new changes that have happened to the different teams around?
Well, I think it's interesting, Lonnie, as there's always, we always look at, I would agree with you 100% on Dame coming to the East. Anytime that you add a player that, when I say agree with you, that he makes whatever team he's on better. I think it's also, sometimes it's hard to predict, where teams are. That's the way we have the season, although a lot of those things are often fairly accurate. It doesn't always take into account teams getting better. And I think for us, obviously, John's in Utah now. By and large, our group is consistent, similar to the group we had last year. So a lot of our improvement and development needs to come internally. And that's something that I think is important for us as a coaching staff and for our players and for you guys also to be mindful of, and that's a little harder to measure. You measure it certainly with your record, but you also can measure it in more subtle kind of ways that aren't always as observable. So it's that's an exciting part of this job. It's also a really challenging one because, as I said before, growth's not always linear, and it also doesn't always happen overnight. So along the way, whatever those challenges, other than like Boston on the road in the Garden, there's a lot of other little things that maybe are more impactful than you think. Sometimes it's after a win. How did you win? Are you winning, by outscoring an opponent and it doesn't feel like you're not executing defensively as much because you're winning? Or can we keep getting better? Ideally, you win and you keep getting better.
Coach, this is your first time having a full off season as the leader of the Atlanta Hawks. What are some of your expectations as you move into a full season as a coach, and then some of your expectations as you continue to embed your philosophy among the team?
Yeah, it's interesting. I last year was valuable in a lot of ways. I was talking with a friend the other day, kind of getting a head start on implementing your system. That we didn't get a head start on that. We're starting that now. What we got a head start on, I think, was having even though it's a small body, it's a body of work from which to kind of analyze and try to kind of understand and evaluate, and from that point trying to come up with, whether it be tactical things, strategic things, points of emphasis as much as anything, that when training camp starts, we can begin, to embrace and teach and try to execute. I think the summer what was about that growth process that I referred to earlier. Our guys continuing to improve. We had a lot of guys that worked, and we need to keep working. The season is about hard work. I would like for that to be characteristic of our system. I think, us being a selfless team is huge, and you can point to that in so many different areas, whether it's taking a charge, making the extra pass, running back on defense, celebrating your teammates' successes. All those different things, demonstrate an unselfish mindset. And I would like for our team, I would like for that to be something that's obvious when you watch us play. With that, my job to try to create systems, style of play that facilitates those things. I mentioned spacing a lot last year, and spacing allows you to move the ball. It allows you to attack, and even though it sounds, if you think of it, it's subtle, but if you're spaced properly, sometimes that can be as simple as like you're not in someone's way when they get to go lay the ball in. And so that's, again, you're doing something for someone else. And I think, what we do defensively, taking some of the things we saw last year, certain lineups have been challenged. Other lineups have been better than others. There's a little bit of a reset in that respect in my mind, if we have different schemes. But schemes, there's certain things you want to take with you and learn from. There's other things you say to yourself, I'm not sure that's as relevant. And for me, one of the biggest things defensively, it doesn't matter what scheme we have. It doesn't matter what the game plan is. Defense has to be a decision. We have to make a decision. And when you make that decision, that doesn't mean you're going to just, all of a sudden defense magically occurs. That's a decision to work, to value something, to make it important. And at that point is when you can start to get better. And that process and that understanding, I think, is really paramount for our team on the way in. The same way, understanding that when we play unselfishly, that's going to connect our team more, and I think that makes it easier to make that decision to defend.
Thank you, Coach. You talked about internal growth. Mm-hmm. What can we expect from your two guys from your alma mater, Duke and AJ and Jalen this year?
Those guys, that process has begun for them, and I think it's important to, where are the most important things where their growth can be most impactful to them and to our team. And my expectation, I've talked a lot about my staff. I think, we're going to pour all of ourselves into those players, and, we want the same thing from them. And, the work that both those guys did this offseason, you want that stuff to translate. And they both work hard. They both love to play. And they're fun guys you look forward to coaching. When I was looking at this job and the possibility that it could work out, there are two guys that you look at and say, it'd be kind of fun to coach that guy. So we're excited about a lot of our young guys. And those two in particular, they're different players, but they complement each other well. And they both have to make a decision to defend. Maybe we kind of forget, when we think about development and we think about player development, we think a lot about skills, and they are important. Shooting, ball handling, passing. Equally important is, how do you play with other people on offense? How do you make people around you better? And then additionally, how do you defend? How can you defend individually and how you defend as a team? That's a little harder to work on. That's more something you see people working on when the team gets together. But, that's something that we're going to push as well,
Hey, Coach. One thing that you've emphasized throughout your coaching career is adapting your offensive approach and scheming towards the personnel on the roster. Mm-hmm. So for this year's Hawks squad, how do you plan to balance aspects of pace and space, pick and roll, and other offensive concepts to create that optimal offensive system?
You dug down and got that, huh? I firmly believe that. For any coach to try to maximize the players that you have, and that means you're not always going to have players with the same skill set in a team. How do they connect with each other? I think one of the key things is to know what you're really good at, and then also to know what can you improve at, and to not forget about what you do really well in the interest of just change for change's sake. So I think for us, we've been a really good offensive team. You know, we are really good playing pick and roll with our fives, in particular with Clint and O. Trey's gifted in that area. DJ's plays pick and roll in a different way, but that's been a big point of emphasis for him. You know, even this summer, he's worked on his pick and roll game. We want to continue to embrace that, but we also want to figure out how to move the ball in other ways, you know, to score out of other actions and other concepts. So we can have even more variety. And when we use Trey as an example, you know, Trey's so good in pick and roll. Trey's good off the ball too, you know, but the challenge is you can say that, but, you know, Trey, well, what do you want me to do off the ball? You know, that's, I think it becomes important for us to ask as coaches, how can we help these? If there's things we want them to do, you know, how can we try to create opportunities for them where they can do them? So, you know, DeAndre's post-up game, you know, those are all things. And I think, as you said, part of that adaptation, that's not like a decision that you make, and it just is. You know, that stuff you have to work on and grow, you know, over time. And then there's adjustments to it. You know, you may find out that the player, you know, doesn't know if he's better on the left side of the floor or the right side of the floor, but you start to figure that out. You know, someone shooting their range, whatever. You're developing individual styles of play and a collective style of play that hopefully fix the group. And, you know, in doing that, you know, the key thing is for the whole to be greater than the sum of the parts. You know, and the more people that are involved in what we're doing, I think the greater the likelihood that we can raise that whole.
Coach, you obviously have a better feel for the organization and the team and the players, and you've been stressing being selfless, defense, hard work. What will you change specifically in a day-to-day to mold this team into that? Because it is going to be a little bit of a shift.
Boy, day-to-day, you know, to me, the words they use, particularly self, those are kind of foundational things, you know, and as much as anything, you know, they have to just be emphasized, and you have to have an awareness about those all the time. And then the day-to-day things, you know, you can ask yourself that, you know, are we staying true to this? You know, are we doing this? Is this who we want to be? Is this the identity? So, you know, we're going to practice. You know, I mean, that sounds like a really obvious statement, you know, but I think it's really important as you're developing, you know, habits, you know, that takes time. I mean, you don't develop a habit unless you do it, and you got to do it in practice in order to help you do it in a game. You know, I think the development work that we want our guys to do, you know, over the course of the season, it's easy to think, okay, it's the summertime, now I'm going to work on something and get better. Well, it's a long time. This season's a long season, you know, we all know. So how can we continue to get better individually, you know, during the course of the season? And that player development component, I think, on a day-to-day level is something that's really important. So the consistency, sometimes when things become mundane, you know, we have to try to be creative to kind of reinvigorate. But maybe the common theme through all that is this league in this regular season, it's about dealing with adversity. Like, it's coming, you know, and you know, I'll start keeping a list of all the different ways so I can answer the question better. But I know they're out there, and I've lived them, you know, and so is this group of guys, you know, whether it's losing a few in a row or how you manage those moments and those times, I think is essential, and to not allow your focus to change when adversity hits. And that doesn't mean you don't do other things, you know, but the foundational things I think you have to stay committed to no matter what the, you know, what the external, what's going on external.
Coach.
Yeah.
This one.
Hey Quinn,
Next.
there's a stretch early in the season where we'll play 10 to 12 games on the road. So I'm curious, what do you do as a coach to help keep focused mentally and physically when a team is on a long road trip like that?
You know, I don't want to sound like I'm avoiding what you're asking. I think every trip is a little different, even the way it's structured. You know, you're going to handle a back-to-back on the road differently than you'll handle, 2 days off. You know, it may be a situation where, your team, you feel fatigue start to set in, and we'll have a blackout day, we call it, where all the lights are off and you're not in the gym. And guys need to just go do what they want to do, go to dinner, hang out, stay in your hotel room. Sometimes you need that. Other times you may need to get in the gym. Other times you might need to watch film. There's rest there's so many different things you're trying to balance. And the road kind of accentuates everything. It dramatizes different things, but that can also be an opportunity, and I think, going through road trips, you hear a lot sometimes, hey, we went through this road trip and it kind of brought our team together. We went through this road trip and it really split our team apart. So I think being mindful of that as a coach, and just a lot of this is just trying to keep a pulse of your team. And you may not have all the answers. You certainly don't have them ahead of time. I haven't really given me any good ones, right? Maybe a day off. But I think if you think about those things, you figure out, how can we impact? How can we help? How can we facilitate? How can we stay together? How can we get better?
Hey, Coach. You talked about selflessness. You added 2 14-year veterans to the roster, Patty Mills and Wesley Matthews. What does that mean to the team?
Well, those guys, that's how they've played that's what they've demonstrated throughout their career. Both of them. These are pros. And, if there's something that, veteran leadership can really be impactful, particularly when that leadership is grounded in that type of experience. They've both been on teams that have won. They know what a winning team looks like. They know what a connected team looks like. And, those are things I think both Patty and Wes, they're giving people. They want to share. They're not. When someone knows that's great, but when they're also willing to share that and understanding how to do it. There's ways to communicate with people. Every player's a little different. And those two guys have different styles. But I think, it's not like that's all we want from them. We've got a group right now that we're trying to figure out, a lot of things about our whole team, and how we're going to fit together, in an objective way on the court. But the qualities that that they bring, and they'll figure out how to be impactful in those ways. It's not like you expect Wes and Patty to stand up and say, hey, here's how it's going to be, guys. But they'll understand what we're trying to accomplish, and that they're not the only ones. They're the ones that have lived it the most, and probably the relationships they have within the team, individually. It can be something as simple as just a guy coming out of the game, or how you thought about this, and hey, let's go to lunch. Whatever those things are, I'm excited to have both those guys in our program.
Well, yeah, Coach. This whole time you were talking a lot about leadership and setting up foundation and everything. I want to know how Trey and DJ fit into your plans as far as not just setting a foundation, but as you said, growth isn't linear for young guys.
Yeah.
So how do you balance? How would you describe the process of empowering them as leaders, but doing your own thing as far as leadership?
Those two, you just kind of you reiterated, I think, what I've talked about with the two of them, that it's natural to evaluate players and a team at the end of the season, and in this case, it involves people evaluating those two guys together, and I think that process, although we talked about kind of recalibrating some things. Every year is really a new year. That process for those two guys is going to be ongoing. It's not going to. We're going to have a chance to evaluate the team evaluate them, evaluate me after a month, and then it'll happen again after 2 months, and it might look different, you know, at the third month than it did the first month. Hopefully it looks better. But that's what I want us to stay focused on. This process, those guys growing together, 2 young players, you know, how can they make one another better? How can they make the team better? That's the leadership that they can really provide that's more subtle. You know, it's less about kind of what you might say. It's what you might do, how you might play, and what you might say. And I think you have to, you know, think about any relationship in our lives, you know, it takes time. You know, and usually in those relationships that are really, the relationships that are most important to you have probably been the most challenging. You know, those are the ones you've probably had, you know, you go through things together, whatever those things are. But they also, from that, provides you the opportunity for growth and depth. And that's when those relationships, and that's when teams, and that's when players, you know, it gets even more real. And it gets even stronger. And so I'm aware of that. You know, I want them to be aware of that. I want all of us to be aware of that. You know, that when you build something that's good, it's not easy. And if you can embrace that and work through that, you know, then you can do it.
Hey, Coach, how big is the addition of Coach Bray? I mean, straight from 2 decades at Notre Dame, prestigious program, straight to your staff. How did that come about as well?
You know, you guys have probably heard me talk about my staff. It was a focal point for me in the time that I was out. You know, as you're kind of trying to figure out, you know, that's the thing I probably have the most control over. You know, as a head coach, that hiring process and figuring out how to put that together. And it's also something, you know, I've built 4 or 5 staffs over the course of my career, and then ongoing, even as guys leave and you know, and move forward. So I'm excited about the group that we have. I think they're talented. It's a diverse group. It's a really relational group, and relational within our, you know, we knocked some walls down in our offices so that, you know, we couldn't see the court. I wanted everybody able to see the court. My office was way too big, so you can see the court through my office right now. I don't really need an office. You know, the court is my office. If I'm spending too much time on my office, I'm probably not doing my job the way that I want to do it, you know? So we've got a group that's good on the court and that's really connected to one another and is really talented from a basketball standpoint. The experience, you mentioned Coach Bray, Nike's 20 years at Notre Dame. Igor's been a head coach with the Phoenix Suns, with national teams. He's been an assistant multiple places in the league. Tony Lang's played in the league, you know, was with me in Utah, has international experience. You know, Brian Bailey is as talented as they come. Ron Norad was in Indiana last year. You know, we got him here now. You can go down the line. You know, Brittany Donaldson, I've talked a lot about with her experience, what she brings to us from an analytics standpoint, in addition to a player development standpoint. Jeff Watkinson, who's our director of player development, who's been with me for 20 years, has a strength and conditioning background. You know, we can just keep kind of pounding out. So 2 young guys that both have D-League experience, Sanjay Lumpkin and Reg, which is kind of interesting because it's also valuable to have some younger guys be able to be on the court, where those guys are, they're able to coach in a different way when you can actually guard somebody, you know, and make that happen, or challenge them in that way. Hopefully they're not as good as our guys, but they can at least provide more resistance. So it's a group I'm really proud of, and I think the reason that it's so important to me is because I know how impactful it is. And someone like Coach Bray, his ability with the experience and success that he's had, you know, to be able to have the humility that's requisite to be a part of a group and to help that group function in a unique way. He's someone, it's interesting that the guys that have been head coaches, even other guys around the league, they value and understand the importance of having a coaching staff that not just gets along, but that connects. And there's a difference. You can get along. If you're connected, you can get through challenges. You can work together if you're connected. If you're connected, you know, you've put the staff and the team in front of yourself. That's what that means to me. And that's what I want our players to feel. And if we can have that from our coaches, that's what Epe Udo was as a player for me in Utah. You know, he that's who he was. So, and that's who he's going to be, you know, as a coach. Steve Clyde, you know, was the one guy that, you know, Ettore Messina in Milan was nice enough to let him come work with me last year. He was the one guy that I brought with me. And he went back to Milan, you know, to Italy at the end of our season to finish the season with them. Everybody's got unique talents. We started that with Mike Bray. I told you how I feel about Coach Bray, but you gave me an opportunity to talk about something that I think is really, really important. And I'm grateful that, you know, Tony Wrestler in particular was one of the things that I talked about with him. We didn't hit a ton of things, but the ones we hit were super important to me. And I've been, you know, empowered to do that. And I think it's huge for our team and where we want to go and foundationally just as a program.
Hey Quinn, I'm curious for the preseason, how much it affords you the opportunity to maybe do some out-of-the-box lineups that the regular season may not afford you?
You know, yes, and there's also kind of the in-the-box stuff that's out of the box. You know, like our box is really, really big because we're trying to figure out, you know, even from a style of play standpoint, from a system standpoint, you know, what we can do and even like some of the things we did in the summer league. You know, Tony Lang was looking at me going, "Coach, what are you diving? No, let's try this because I want to see it." You know, and so you learn more about your group. You know, that pushed us forward a little bit, and Tony did a great job with that because we're able to get feedback. That process will continue to occur. But part of that, like what you're suggesting, is also part of that process. You know, so if we can see some things, we can see some different combinations, we can see some different lineups. I want whoever's on the court, I want them to play a certain way, and that's independent of combinations. Those fundamental things that we're asking, I think, if we can see that, then it gives us a better, you know, it gives us a chance to evaluate. And the NBA is, you know, the matchups can become so important, you know, and not that you can't be creative with how you play, but it is a matchup game. And if you can have multiple matchups and play different ways, that's an advantage too.
Quinn, how do you envision handling the in-season tournament this year?
First of all, I think it's great. You know, I think the league has done an excellent job of kind of identifying ways to improve our sport. You know, and it's something that, you know, I think that happened with the play-in tournament. There was part of people originally like, I'm not sure, and I think I haven't heard anyone say they're not for the play-in, you know, especially as it's evolved. So I think the in-season tournament is something, as you see, you know, international play and how, like in the ACB, you know, the EuroLeague stops and then the ACB has their in-season tournament in Spain, you know, and it generates a level of interest. It's another bite at the apple, you know, and I think that's fun. I think it's fun for fans. I think it's a learning experience too for players and for coaches. You know, you get a chance to see your team in what is in some ways analogous to a playoff setting, you know, earlier in the year. So you want a team to compete at the highest level every night out over 82 games, but 82 is a lot of games. So if we can draw attention to some games earlier, and not that they mean something in addition to. They still count the same, as we all know, but the implications are there. And to have your team be aware of that, it's actually something Wes Matthews and I talked about. He brought it to me. He says, "Coach, hey, I think maybe this could be something, you know, can we talk about this?" It was like, you know, yes. You know, I like it that we're thinking the same way on that. You know, so I think it's an opportunity.